Welcome back to the Amazin Citi podcast. A little bit different look today. Me, Jack, joined again by our friend Michael Mayer of MetsMerized Online, Mets Miners, a million different things. A man that wears many hats. No Slader today. He is very selfishly getting married, and out of pocket for a couple weeks. So Mike is the first of probably a handful of guests we'll have on. Mike, thanks for coming on. How's everything?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Jack. Excited to be back on.
Really appreciate you. So, Mike, we're going to jump right into it. It's been an interesting year for the Mets so far, as we stand right now with the team currently playing game two against Houston. There are multiple games under 500 and a unconvincing multiple games under 500. Not much of a there's not much of a feel right now. Well, if this breaks this way, things will get fixed. It feels like they're two, three, four, possibly even five things away from becoming a contender, getting back into the playoff hunt. What's your overall read right now on where the Mets are and where 2023 might lead them the rest of the way?
Yeah, I think the most obvious word is underperformance, right? Max Scherzer last night was standing. He was great last night against the Astros. He's been disappointing. Justin Verlander pitching well right now, and he pitched well his last time out, but he's been overall very disappointing actually. And he missed a month of the season. Lindor's had a really weird season where he's batting 217 and his on base is under 300, but he's third in the NL in RBIs and he's still playing good defense. Jeff McNeil, I seemingly has no power at all anymore. I mean, the last couple of years he hasn't been a guy that's hit for a ton of power, but he's in the bottom of the group and the baseball in isolated slugging now. So that's certainly not good.
The doubles have
Starling
gone
Marte,
away too.
well, yeah, that's the thing. When you're talking about power, it's not just home runs. Like we don't expect McNeil to be like a 20 home run guy anymore, but he's typically still like a 35 doubles guy and 35 doubles. And he just hasn't hit any extra base hits this year. Starling Marte, another one. I think he's the one that kind of gets not talked about as much, but he's quite possibly been the worst of like the veterans that you just penciled in. Like, hey, he's going to bat second all year and be fantastic, like he was last year. Outside of a couple of minor injuries, he's been really bad offensively. Not hitting for average, not getting on base, not hitting for power. His defense hasn't been great either. I guess the one thing of value that the Mets have got from Marte this year is stolen bases. He's been great in that department, but yeah, I think you're talking about overall underperformance from guys that you expected to have good to great seasons, and when you have a ton of those guys, particularly, I mean, you can look at the top of the starting rotation. It's going to be tough to be a team that's at least at 500 or above. I mean, this is a team that we shouldn't even be talking about hovering around 500. This is a team that should be 8-10 games above 500, battling for first place, and it just hasn't happened. And I think a lot of it has to do with underperformance.
So, with this underperformance, where does I don't want to say blame, but where does the fault fall? Is this on Buck Showalter? Is this on, Jeremy Barnes, Jeff Albert, and the new hitting infrastructure? Is this just simply guys who have what it takes to succeed, but just simply aren't? Where does
I think that's a really good question, and I'm not sure anyone outside of the players really have like a great answer to that. I think part of it is, I mean, some of these guys are older. I mean, you can't walk around that. I mean, the fact that Verlander and Scherzer are at the very end of their careers. Obviously, they both had very good years last year at advanced age, but at some point, Father Time catches up. Like, you can't pitch until you're 45 in the big leagues and be very successful. It rarely ever happens. So,
Rich Hill's going
um,
to give it a shot?
Yeah, and he's pitched good for the Pirates, and he did against the Mets. But yeah, I think maybe that can be part of it. And I think going into that, maybe it's them getting used to the pitch clock. I think that's certainly something that can be looked at. I know looking at Scherzer, the deeper he gets into games, the more he's starting to get hit a little bit, and that's not typical of him because of he has such great stuff that those third time through the order, well, as Verlander gives up a home run to Bregman, um, third time through the order,
Try
Verlander
not to
stuff
bring
still,
it up.
yeah, Verlander stuff still plays, Scherzer stuff still plays, but we're seeing now that maybe with them both struggling deeper into their outings, that maybe that pitch clock is getting to their stamina. I think that's certainly something I think you can focus on uh, with some tangibility of what might actually be causing some of that. With a guy like Lindor, I don't know. I mean, it's just such a weird season for him where he's essentially been a power hitter that doesn't get on base a lot, which is not really something he's ever done in his career. Like he's always been a guy that gets on base at a pretty good clip, even when he does show power.
Is it
Um,
possible he's selling out for power, which is eliminating, like Gary, Keith, and Ron talk about this all the time, the singles. He's not picking up the singles. The ratio of extra base hits to one base hits is very extreme. Is it possible he's just selling out for power, seeing a lack of value in singles?
yeah, I mean, I know Garrett Keith and Ron also talk about the fact that his strikeout rate is up, and it is. It's at a career high at 22.7, but that's also
A league
league
average.
average right now. So while it's high for him, it's still not a number that you're like, wow, it's not like 30%, which you see some of these big home run hitters. So he's still making more contact. And yeah, to your point, his launch angle is up this year. And I think he's pulling the ball more too. So it's so tough to dissect, especially when we're talking. I know we have a decent sample size now, but it's still nothing compared to like a full season or full seasons of a hitter like that. So yeah, I think there's obviously look, Lindor is having different he's having different stats, like he's having different production and in a different way, like we've talked about. So I certainly think there can be you can look at exactly what you're talking about. Maybe him looking to pull the ball more and for more power this year with the elimination of the shift. I mean, that's how some people have always kind of counteracted the shift was, or the fact that you didn't have the shift is, well, you can just hit the ball over their head, right? Like that's how some
Yeah.
players have counteracted that.
I mean, Joey Gallo.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been other players that aren't like such three outcome type people that have done the same type of thing. I mean, Michael Conforto did it before too. He had a couple of years where he's like, well, if you're gonna shift on me like that, I'm just gonna hit it over your head. And he had a couple of good years like that. Like players can be
Yeah,
successful
30 homer
doing.
years.
Yeah, and I think probably the weirdest thing is just how bad Lindor has been from the left side, right? Like he's been actually a pretty good hitter from the right side this year, and a majority of his struggles have come left-handed. So that's something obviously he's got to figure out, because you don't want Lindor being around 100 OPS plus guy. Like you want him to be in the 120 range. Like that's what you got him for. That's why he gave him that extension. So yeah, I think it's something you gotta look for him in the second half to see if he's going to make some adjustments, or even before the month before the second half. But I think the other one is Marte. Like I at first it was like, well, is this guy healthy? And I still kind of question that, because he feels like a guy that's going to play through stuff.
I mean, he tried to
And
last year. He did in the playoffs.
yeah, and he did. And but just the fall off from last year to this year is just crazy. And obviously, again, Marte he's an older player, 33, 34. That's an older player for a guy that's run a lot, that's played a lot in the outfield. Like he's an he's not a young guy anymore, but to just fall off like he has like this, it just doesn't make sense unless like there is some underlying issue like a nagging injury. From it, I mean, the guy had the double surgery that I'm sure was very uncomfortable. But then you go to, well, he's still stealing bases, but his sprint speed is down. So is that more about the rules that he's really taking advantage of, and which the Mets certainly are? They somehow lead the league in stolen base success rate coming into tonight. So I think to get to your bigger point, I do think the majority of this simply lies on the players' underperformance, and I you can't really put that on any people or coaches without knowing more about like what goes on like day to day. I do think you can certainly next in line. I think the blame is when you're talking about on-field staff is Buck, because he needs to put these guys in better situations to succeed. Um, and I think part of that is like Starling Marte is still hitting second right now, like the pressure of him at the top of the lineup. And I just don't think that's where he needs to be right now. Like he's not one of the Mets' best 4 or 5 hitters. And so he should not be at the top of the lineup. Let him get in the back of the lineup and kind of just get through whatever he needs to, fight
Well,
through whatever he's going through.
and it seems as though a lot of the direct correlation with Marte hitting second has been Alvarez then in turn hitting, whether it be sixth, ninth, like he's hit for most of the year. And then you talk about putting guys in positions to succeed. I know you're not a huge lineup construction guy. You don't believe in, lineup protection. But there is something to be said for, you having a guy like Marte who's hitting 260, but is probably slugging a lot closer to 260 than you'd like, getting a prominent lineup spot over guys like Beatty, Alvarez, and Vientos when he was up, constantly in the lower third or lower half of the order.
Yeah, I mean, even so, like Jeff McNeil, we talked about the struggles that he's had with power. I mean, he still is getting on at a much higher clip than Marte. So why wouldn't you just put him in the 2 spot if you're dead set against like putting Alonso 2, or Lindor 2? Buck
Well,
has pretty much made it so that he wants to do Lindor 3 and Alonso 4, which he's kind of settled into after a while now. And I don't agree with it, but that's kind of what he's settled into. So if you're not going to put Alvarez there, which again I think is fine, he's more of the power hitter that I would hit like fifth probably. Then put McNeil in hitting second. He's still getting on base at a high clip, and that's what you want in front of Lindor and Alonso. So I think, I mean, as we dig into the issues that the Mets have had, I think a lot of them, once you get past the players, I think a lot of it has to do with Buck. And I think, it's not crazy. I mean, Buck has had success in the past with other teams, but he's also essentially failed with all of those teams because he hasn't done anything in the playoffs with any of his previous stops. And he's kind of been marred by decisions as a manager as to why. I mean, we know the bullpen stuff in Baltimore, and we've seen some questionable bullpen moves with the Mets over the last 2 years. And we've now seen some issues this year with how not only how he's handled young players just from a lineup aspect.
how he talks about them.
Yeah, I have a huge issue, and I've talked to other people in the Mets organization that have a huge issue with how he's talked about the players and how that's kind of coincided with the usage or non-usage of those players. So
What was it that he said the other day about Vientos? Like, you can't ruin the good ones.
yeah, it
You
was
definitely can't.
oh, and I think that's
Or
like
when Vogelbach was really struggling, and the quick quip from someone asking why Vientos wasn't in. Well, Vogelbach's a good option too. Like there's always there's a reason to not. He always has the reason lined up.
well, and I think my bigger issue too is that his reason with young players is always something that doesn't necessarily make sense, like his backup quarterback thing earlier in the year. And like you're talking about the Vientos, you can't ruin a good player. But when it comes to veteran players, he always has like a built-in excuse, like right there, ready to go. Like, this is my guy or whatever, and this is why he's going to succeed.
Got to get him
And
going.
yeah, and it's okay to show confidence in a player. Like, it's okay for a manager to do that, but there also has to be a level playing field about doing that for your veteran and also doing it for your young player. Like, you want that young player to succeed, and he's going to be with the organization for a very long time, hopefully, whether it's Alvarez, Beatty, Vientos, Mauricio, when it comes up, these type of guys. Like, so you, it feels like he's almost slighting these young players sometimes when he's making some of these comments in favor of the veteran players, which again is kind of an issue that I've had, and I think I don't think
It hasn't gone
it's up.
unnoticed.
No, it hasn't gone unnoticed, and I think it's an issue that he's previously had in other organizations too, and these things are gonna their heads are gonna poke out eventually. And the Mets won 101 games last year, and look, Buck is a really good, let's get him ready for the season type manager. He's really good. Let's make sure they know all the rules. They know we practice every little detail, that type of thing. But he's always struggled in game. And we saw that even last year, winning 101 games. We saw it late in the year last year when um, he kind of let some games where they were down 1 or 2 runs. He acted like they had lost those games already and used relievers that were not high leverage guys, and it ended up costing them some games. And we
In a
saw,
division where there was won by a tiebreaker.
yeah, and that also, I mean, early in the year, you could talk about games where he essentially used low leverage relievers and high leverage spots too, just because it was April. Like
The
that
one I'll
that
never get over is he had this was before they cut him, but his inability to properly utilize a guy like Robinson Cano, who clearly is a very one-dimensional guy who can only hit righties. I think it was Washington. He left him in to face a lefty with JD Davis sitting on the bench. His excuse was you gotta get Cano some confidence. And this ties back into your previous point of there's always a built-in excuse ready to back up in-game failure.
Oh, and it's always about the veteran player that he's sticking with too. Like even recently, I mean, Guillorme is the veteran player now between him and Vientos. Well, he's a veteran player on the Mets anyway because of their turnover. So he's had 2 opportunities in 1-run games to use Vientos, and
And that's not
instead,
counting Cincinnati when he chose to bring he chose to bring Guillorme off the bench.
yeah, that's what I mean. So it like that just doesn't make any sense when you're in a 1-run game and you have Vientos, who granted has struggled at the big league level in sporadic opportunities, but he's a home run guy. Like that's his biggest tool is his power. So he's either going to hit for power in the major leagues or he's not. And that's the time to find out because Guillorme doesn't have any. So it's a 1-run game. That's the position like that. That's why you would have Vientos on the roster, is that type of position, and to not use him. And then I think at one point he mentioned handedness, that he didn't want Vientos to bat against a righty, and so Guillorme is lefty. But then
Righties, which Vientos kills.
but then they also played him against Strider, Keller, and Cole for 3 of his next 4 starts after saying that handedness. So there's
A lack of consistent. Yeah.
there's an extreme lack of consistency. And I don't think it's just Buck. I do think there's some disconnect in the front office between what Buck wants to do and what Billy Epler and his guys that he brought over from the Angels kind of want to do. So I think there's some disconnect there. And there's also some agreement on the end of the younger players. Look, Epler has been, it's pretty well known within the organization and previous stops that if he's going to have a choice, he's going to go with the veteran player and kind of hold back the younger players much as he can. I mean, we saw it last year. I mean, there was calls for Vientos, Beatty, and Alvarez last year, and essentially it was injury that kind of brought Beatty and Alvarez up, before they really, I mean, after they probably could have. And it started this year too. I mean, Beatty started in the minor leagues when he was clearly the better option between him and Escobar. So it's, I think it's, you have to be frustrated as a Mets fan, not only for this year, but for to see how that Buck and Billy are treating potential young stars now and for the future. Because look, this is a team that they're building, trying to win long term, not just short term.
Right. And before we switch topics and talk about more younger guys, more prospects and all that, which I know we'll obviously have a ton of fun with. It's as you're bringing up the point of sliding, whether it's intentional or not, sliding prospects. I go back to spring training, but it almost felt as though Buck went out of his way to complement and kind of prop up on a pedestal the defensive strides guys like Alvarez and Beatty have made, which we've seen on full display in the majors. But then, just weeks later, when it comes to reporters asking Buck about Beatty's play in AAA, he says, well, that's what he's supposed to do. Almost as if to dismiss that. And it's just the both sides of it, going out of his way to prop these guys up while at the same time dismissing some of their efforts. It's just something that kind of came to my mind as we're having this conversation.
No, and I think he also said like a similar thing about Vientos, and then I think it was like maybe 24 hours, and Vientos was called up after he made like a similar, just brushing off the fact that they're doing really good. And like
It's
you
like
said,
well, yeah, what do you
was,
want them to do? Struggle in AAA? Like, it takes
yeah,
2 seconds to be like, yeah, they're playing great. Next question.
yeah, and exactly what we talked about. That's what he kind of goes out of his way to do with players like Escobar, Vogelback, Marte, struggling veterans.
For a
And
while, fam.
fam, yeah, and if you really want to think about it, like who of those group of players really needs you to stick behind them? The veteran that's gone through this stuff for 10, 12 years, or the rookie prospect that's going to come up and hopefully be with the team and be a part of a winning organization for 6, 7 years? Like, which group will you want to make sure that you're vocally behind and vocally making sure publicly that you are saying good things about?
No, yeah, and of like the group of guys you named, I think I believe Marte is the only one under a guaranteed contract for next year. Like, it's a willingness to kind of put all your chips on the table of guys who are going to be hitting the open market in 6 months versus guys that are hopefully franchise cornerstones in the next 3 years. It's incredible stuff.
And
I
I
don't know
mean,
how else to put it.
the flip side is too, like, if, I mean, Alvarez is clearly going to stay, Beatty's clearly going to stay at this point, but like a guy like Vientos or Mauricio might get traded if they need pieces at the deadline. But like, also trade value wise, like obviously there's scouts. There's plenty of numbers that all the teams have now, but you still wouldn't want to say anything publicly that might
Raise
like raise an
concern.
eyebrow to another team. Be like, oh, well, they don't think this of Mark Vientos, so why would we, when we have conversations about him in a trade, why would we think of him that way? So it just, yeah, all around those type of comments, and they backed it up. I mean, Buck backed up those type of comments too with Vientos in particular, or you
Just the
can
playing
even
time.
say, yeah, and Beatty at the start, Buck and Billy, for the fact that he wasn't with the team. And I think now Alvarez a little bit where there's no consistency in his lineup spot. Like his veterans, like we talked about, Marte will just keep hitting second, even though he's one of the Mets' worst hitters. And Alvarez, he's just bouncing around everywhere. Like, again, wouldn't you want him, that young hitter, to get that continuity? It feels like a lot of this stuff is just completely backwards of how it actually should be.
I'll give you a quick yes or no before we shift topics. Would you describe this as dysfunctional?
No.
That's all I needed. So switching gears, we're gonna get into a little prospect talk now. It's been, I'd say, a good year for the Mets farm system. They've had a lot of nice, pleasant developments aside from what you were hoping to get out of guys like Vientos, Mauricio, Beatty Alvarez. Specifically looking at the pitching staff, I know you've been highlighting Christian Scott lately. Tyler Stewart, I believe, the last I checked, was still leading all of full season minor league baseball in ERA. You're looking at see a lot of relievers who are having big years, whether it's Nate Lavender, Daniel Juarez, Grant Hartwig now promoted. What's kind of been your outlook on the development of arms in the Mets system so far this year?
Yeah, first off, I think I would disagree with the statement of that it's been a good year development wise. I would say it's been an uneven year, simply because of it's been good because of some of the names we're going to talk about, but I think it's also been disappointing for some of the ones that we probably won't get into tonight a lot, like Alex Ramirez,
Yeah, the guys at
Kevin
the top of the list.
Kevin Prada. Yeah, the guys that are on top of the list now because of Alvarez, Beatty, and Vientos graduating from those lists. So the guys that are kind of at the top now, I think there's some reasons to be concerned about what they're doing. But yeah, we'll stick with the positive, like you were talking about in the pitching department. And you didn't even mention Mike Vasil, who is the most important of the group right now because he's in AAA and he's that one phone call away, essentially, which could be any time with, I mean, Carrasco having a uneven season, McGill coming off a good start, but he's been mostly not very good for the Mets. David Peterson's been just awful at the major league level and the minor league level. So
And even
Mike
then, just
Vasil,
having the injury risk of two 40-year-olds who have both already been hurt this year.
yeah, yeah, and I mean,
One through
you hope Quintana's going to come back healthy. He's made 2 rehab starts now, but yeah, Mike Vasil, he struggled a little bit in his first AAA start. He gave up 6 runs, which was like almost as much as he had like the 2 months prior. But he did get a lot of swings and misses in that game, and the velocity and everything was still fine. So, I
an
mean,
interesting run environment in AAA.
oh yeah, I mean,
It feels like the entire league is morphing into the Pacific Coast League,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely a high scoring environment, especially compared to
the
Eastern
Eastern
League and
League.
even Binghamton. I mean, it's a pretty neutral area. So, um, I think you'll be fine. You'll kind of just settle in his first start. I do think it was kind of weird timing because he had just missed time with a minor back issue and then only came back and had 2 outings and then went to AAA and they hadn't really extended him back to where he was pre-missing a couple of weeks. So I thought it was weird timing, but it also kind of showed me a sense of urgency where the Mets were like, well, we can't go all year with Tyler McGill having a 5 ERA or Carlos Carrasco having a 7 ERA. Like, we want to make sure Vasil gets some outings in AAA. So uh, I wouldn't look too much into his first start there, and we'll see what he does this week with his start. And I think, yeah, I've said it before the season even started that I thought Vasil was a guy that was gonna make a big league start this year, and he certainly hasn't done anything to persuade me otherwise. And kind of sliding into a spot, and you mentioned him as Christian Scott. I think he has to be the biggest jump. I was just getting ready to update my top 35 prospect list today, and I had Scott 28th last month. And when I was just updating it, I had him still moving stuff around, but I had him probably like 10th right now. And I mean, that's a pretty significant jump. And
Especially in just a month time.
oh yeah, but I mean, most of that is he was just ranked low because he essentially hadn't pitched at all this year. His season was pushed back due to some minor stuff that he had to start the year. So he had only pitched, I think he had only had like 1 outing when I had made that list. So he just needed to get on the field to really jump up my list. And not only he's done that, but he's pitched to a 2.56 ERA. And I think probably the most impressive stat for him is 39 Ks, to 4 walks. I mean, he's
Between him and
shown
Vassell,
great.
it's a common theme.
Yeah, I know exactly. Vassell has been terrific in the same area. Uh, and it's command for these guys. And I think that's what's taken them to the next level. I mean, for Scott, he in previous minor league seasons, he had kind of struggled with his command, particularly anything outside of a slider. That was really the only pitch he was commanding before this year. And his fastball, the command looks better. And I think a big game changer for him this year is his changeup is finally becoming a legit third pitch, which he really was missing. He was pretty much a fastball slider guy before this year, and his changeup has turned into a much better pitch. And part of that's command, and he's getting a little better movement on that pitch too. But I think, hey, you can't talk about a pitcher without talking about velocity, right? And he's been up to 98 this year, and that's a little bit of a jump for him. I mean, he's typically in most outings he's 93, 95, but he has been up to 97, 98, and because of his release angle, his velocity plays up. He gets a flat angle on it, which is good for swings and misses. So, yeah,
As a three as
no,
a
go
three
for it.
pitch guy, does he project long term as a starter?
Yeah, I think for me before, and that's why I had him lower, was in the low
Reliever.
20s because I thought he was a reliever at that point. So now with his changeup, the
And
way
the
I feel
command.
about his changeup, I think he's no doubt a starter. And it kind of depends on if he continues on this trajectory where he ends up as a starter. I think right now you could pencil him in as a 4 or 5 guy and be pretty comfortable with that evaluation with what he's done. So that's obviously a huge development for the Mets. And I like we've talked about, that's essentially happened over the last 5 weeks, this development for Scott. I mean, he just made his AA debut on his birthday the other day and struck out 9 in 1-run ball for 6 innings. And it was his second straight outing of 9 Ks. So yeah, that's huge for the Mets. And you mentioned Tyler Stewart too, who leads all of minor league baseball with a 1.47 ERA. And
He's an interesting
again,
one because I know you're not terribly high on him relative to, a kid's getting ready to enter the third, fourth month of the season, leading all of minor league baseball in ERA.
well, I mean, just think like comparing the stuff. I think Scott has better stuff. He's got a better fastball, not just velocity wise, but swing and miss wise. Stewart is typically like 93, 94, but his fastball does play up too because he's a 6'9" guy that throws from a high release point that
Have
major
great
league,
extension.
yeah, hitters don't see a ton of, and it's just a good angle for him. And I think he throws a ton of sliders. I think he's very comfortable with the slider, and that's something in the minor leagues. Like if you're throwing a slider 45% of the time as a starter in the minor leagues, like you're gonna get hitters out as long as you have command of it, which he clearly does. I mean, that's another common trend between all these guys is they're throwing a ton of strikes and they're also getting a ton of swings and misses because they're throwing their off-speed pitches out of the zone and getting hitters to swing at them. So,
Well, and
yeah, I
those
think,
three guys we've mentioned, those are 3 strong sliders.
yeah. I mean, and they're also, I mean, they're a little older guys too. And I think that's kind of like with Stewart, he's 24 in single A. I mean, that's not his fault, but he should be in double A right now. Like the Mets, I'm assuming he'll get promoted pretty soon. So for him and Scott, both 24 in double A, it's not old, but it's certainly to the point where like these aren't the type of guys that you're going to see
There is
around.
no
Like,
challenge there anymore.
yeah, then they're not type of guys that you're going to hear about. Like, oh, these are the top pitching prospects, like on top 100 type list at that age either, without like seriously like a huge fastball. So, but that this is great for the Mets because I mean we talked about the rotation is Verlander and Scherzer at the top, and you have Carrasco in there too. Quintana's only on a 2-year deal, an older guy, so they desperately need to develop starting pitching.
Controllable
So
pitching.
for Vassell, Scott, and Stewart to all have the years that they're having, that's just huge because Dominic Hamill and Blade Tidwell, who are probably their second and third pitching prospects in the system. Some people have them first and second ahead of Vassell. They both had uneven years. They've both struggled pretty badly with control. Both of them are just walking too many guys, which that's pretty simple. I mean, if you're walking too many guys, you're going to give up too many runs. Tidwell's strikeout game has been better than
when he controls the walks. I mean, he
yeah.
puts up some lines of 8 strikeouts, but he gave up 6 free passes and plunked the guy.
Well, yeah, and that's because, I mean, again, his stuff plays way better than Brooklyn. Like, stuff-wise, he could be in Double-A. It's just you want him down there because the perfect game's over. The Mets are not going to
I had it on my phone and I turned it off.
perfect game against them tonight. But
so just for the sake of time, because my Zoom has decided to tell me we have 3 minutes left.
Yep.
I want to get your quick thoughts on Jet Williams, just as we've now seen him full season in St. Lucie. Good spot for him, I think, given his age and his talent. But he's not putting up much of an average. Not that average matters, or really that it's important to stat line scout, minor leagues. But he's hitting 222, 416, 346. That's still a 750, 770 OPS. But it's one of the weirder slash lines I've ever seen. What do you make of him, given that they're also now trying him in center field?
Yeah, like you said, it's certainly a weird slash line, but you're also talking about a 19-year-old that's putting up an on-base percentage over 400. So there's obviously pretty
there's time
elite
for power to develop.
Yeah, and I don't think he's a guy that you need to rush if you don't want to. Like you said, they're also trying him in center field, so you want him to get more comfortable out in that position. He's kind of switched back and forth between short and center most of the year.
So do you think that's out of a worry of him at shortstop, or just this dude's got incredible legs, we think he can handle it?
I think it's them appreciating his skill set and thinking that he can handle center. Because otherwise, I don't think you'd bounce him back and forth kind of like they have. If you just think he's going to end up being a center fielder, I think you kind of just put him out there for a lot. But he's been playing some short too. So, yeah, I honestly don't have a ton of worry about Jet Williams. Not as much as the first two I mentioned earlier, Parada and Ramirez. And since we're running low on time, I wanted to make sure that I talked about a group of players that we haven't yet. And that's the Double-A Binghamton Rebel Ponies outfield of Rowdy Jordan, Matt Rudick, and Brendan McElwain. So Rudick's obviously like one of the pop-up prospects the Mets have had this year. He's OPS over 900. He's somehow like 4 inches smaller than I am, and I'm not a tall person.
He's Wyatt Young sized.
Yeah, he's just getting on base at a crazy clip. He's showing a little bit of pop. He's got 12 steals and 13 tries.
His OPS is still pushing 1,000.
Yeah, he's solid outfielder in all 3 spots. I mean, he should be in AAA at any time. Rowdy Jordan.
Peraza too. Peraza.
Oh, yeah, Peroza. Yeah, he's had a great year, but let's focus on the outfielders. Stay on it, Jack.
We have 45 seconds left.
And Jordan's had a great month of June. He had 3 home runs in the first 2 months, and he's got 5 in June.
Plays a stellar center field as well.
Yeah, he's a weird one where he can also play second base, kind of like, I don't want to compare him to Jeff McNeil, but kind of in that aspect where he has that. Yeah, and McElwain is a former D1 quarterback it looks like he's got an OPS over 1,000 this month, so he's starting to put some things together.
Incredible stuff, Mike. We beat the clock. This was the Amazin Citi podcast. Mike, thank you so much. We hit the buzzer. We'll even end before this kicks us off.